Okay, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. So we have with us Dr. Dicky Susanto, who will be speaking with us on secondary math titles, resources. I am your host for today. I'm Cheng Si. I'm from Oxford University Press, based in Malaysia. So I believe some of you would have heard Dr. Dicky and I discussing about the different situations in countries. So I was sharing how in Malaysia the schools have opened for everyone since just last week, and the students have, but they have not been able to play around. There's no more assembly, there's no PE, so that's a situation in Malaysia. So, and I believe in your school you would have your exciting your challenges as well. Also, the other thing that I wanted to share is how the teachers are asking parents to contribute to pay for sanitizers, for masks. You know, they're collecting funds for that. So that's what's happening in Malaysia right now. So it's quite interesting. Okay, yeah, I'll go on to just share a little bit about the today's session. So hold on, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so today our session is called Opening Minds to an Amazing World. And the reason why we use the word amazing here is I believe most of you here would have used or will be using the amazing maths book that OUP produces. So, and I believe that maybe some of you might have even joined us in a previous face-to-face workshops where we have talked about these resources that we have. So today we have Dr. Dicky, who will be sharing how can we use these resources more effectively, especially during these challenging times. And what are some of the resources that we have provided to support teachers teaching in the classroom, whether virtual or face-to-face. So before we begin, I'll just share that a certificate of participation will be issued to your email, which you have used to register for this meeting. And also to let everyone know that this meeting is actually currently being recorded. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A box where you will be able to pose questions to Dr. Dicky, as well as to myself. If you have any pertinent question that you would like to be picked up and addressed, so put it in the Q&A box. Later on, we will also be sharing a poll question, which we would love for you to take part in. So just take a few seconds to answer the questions, which we will eventually launch later. There is also a chat box where I think some of you have already started putting in your comments on where you're from, where you're teaching. So continue to use the chat box to put in your comments, your views, or if you would like to address anything. So a little bit about our speaker today. He is none other than Dr. Dicky. He's actually the head of curriculum and instructional design at Kelvin Institute of Technology, where he develops and delivers pedagogical workshops and peer teaching review. So he has been working very closely with Oxford University Press when we first came out with the resources and wanted to see how we can provide these trainings to the teachers in Indonesia, whereby what we wanted to show was how the book itself actually talks about dual curriculum. So we have both the Cambridge curriculum as well as the Ujian National, and how this is one of the first books in the market that actually has combined both of these resources together. So Dr. Dicky has very kindly helped us come up with training module for you. He also helped review and revise the 2013 Indonesian National Curriculum. He's part of the team. And in fact, he has also been sitting very closely with the MOE recently when there are talks about what are the curriculum to cover during this pandemic session. So I will now pass the time to Dr. Dicky, who will be able to run you through these resources. Okay, over to you, Dr. Dicky.
Okay, thank you very much, Ingsa, and welcome everyone. Hello, good afternoon, and thank you for being here, attending. I know this is not the best time, like right after lunch, and probably most of you have taught the whole morning. So this is probably quite a challenging time to stay awake. But I hope that this session there'll be more interactive. Unfortunately, we didn't set up a Zoom meeting where you can have breakout rooms. Instead, we have a webinar. So this is going to be one of the challenges that we have to face. But before we proceed, so Jingse, if you could ask them like the language, if they prefer, or have you deleted that?
We didn't put that in. We have excluded
Oh,
that
okay.
from today.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So I hope it will be okay for me to deliver the entire session using Indonesian. Is that okay? Participants, if you have objection, please let me know in the chat box. So I'm more than happy to sort of mix. If not, then I'll deliver the entire session using English. Oh, no English. Okay, so we have, okay, this is good.
So you have to mix now.
I have to mix, okay? Yeah.
Yeah, you have to mix both.
Okay, so we have, oh, okay, English only. Okay, English only. But there is one. Oh, okay, so the same person. Okay, there is yeah, punctuation is important, right? So no period, English only. Okay, all right. Okay, so, all right, that's good.
Oh, English, please. Actually, majority is English then.
Actually, yeah, yeah, okay, good. So I'll deliver in
Okay,
English.
English, yeah.
Right. So as Jingse mentioned earlier, I've been working closely with the Minister of Education, and currently, actually, I've been working on developing numeracy modules that will be launched sometimes uh, next week, I think. Like the plan is probably this Thursday, but I'm not sure. It keeps changing because there are a lot of things still unfinished. But there will be launching a new modules that will be for primary, actually not secondary yet, but for primary, especially for those in the remote areas. So those will be modules that focuses more on literacy and numeracy. So that's been the project that has been going on. And also I was involved in the AKM. I don't know if you're familiar that our national exam now is no longer the same, right? So we're going to have instead starting, I think next year is what is called the assessment competency minimum, minimum competencies assessment. So which is significantly different from the UN, the national exam, Ujian Nasional, that we used to have. Okay, but today I'm not going to be talking about that. So I'll talk about a little bit about the AKM, the assessment in our, when is the next session? I think it's one of the Saturdays that's coming. Probably Jingse will later on will announce it when. So I'll talk a little bit more about the type of assessment that has really changed. So today the focus is more on looking at some of the resources. So let me just share my screen first. Okay, so the outcomes for today's session is, so first I'll be talking about the shift, paradigm shift in education. And especially it becomes more and more true in this context of home learning, distance learning, call what you may, but this is becoming more and more challenging for teachers and students as well. So I'll be talking a little bit about that, not much. And then we'll look at some of the resources that's available through OPM. There's definitely a wealth of resources, but most importantly, the third part is we're going to look at how we're going to use, and I'm going to use one example, okay, as a way to introduce you also to PBL. I think probably some of you are already familiar with problem-based learning and also a cooperative learning strategy, Jigsaw. But I'm going to show you how you can do that, especially in the context of distance education or online learning. So those are the outcomes. Okay, so 3 topics. So first of all, before we start, I would like to ask you to a little bit interactivity. If you can go to this web address, https://padlet.com/Dicky Susanto/OUP. Okay, and I would like you to type in your thoughts or what your typically what's the thing that you spend most in thinking in preparation for your lesson. Okay, so the prompt is when I plan my lesson, the majority of the time is spent on thinking about. Okay, so please fill that using this padlet.com. Okay, I'll move to that second. So let me just type that address to attendees. Okay, so in the chat box, I already put that in so that you can also just click on that. And so it should take you to this map, world map. And all you need to do is just double click anywhere on the map and start typing in your answer. And if you would like, so if you haven't signed in with your Google, it will show anonymous, but if you can also double click on that to change your name. But if you feel like you want to remain anonymous, go ahead as well. So you can just type in here. Okay, I'm still. Okay. Okay, so as you can see, real time, people are already start typing in their answers. I think this is a very exciting tools you can use with your students as well. If you want to engage your students, finding more about what they know, so this could be a very useful tool. Okay, some have commented that so spend most of the time thinking about method of teaching and what material that should be covered. Okay, that's I think a lot of teachers do that, right? What method that you're going to use, right? Whether it's going to be direct instruction or some other form of active learning. And some of you mentioned about thinking how it will be logically arranged. Okay, so the arrangement, the sequence of the instruction, and how it is going to be enjoyable. Okay, so from the perspective of the students, you want to engage them and see that they enjoy the lesson as well. Good. Okay, fun method for teaching, the way to explain mathematics in an effective way. Think about the learning method. Okay, so one teacher mentioned about the most effective way of teaching, ensuring there's interaction. And that becomes more and more important, especially in the context of online learning, right? The interaction, because basically it's hard for us to really see what the students are doing. Okay, so some mentioned about math games, fun method. Okay, good, so that students are motivated. Okay, thinking about how students understand about topic, how to explain well. Okay, some games. Okay, there. Well, an interesting response. I plan my lesson. First of all, I try to make them do a research. Wow. Okay, that would be great to hear what kind of research you ask your students to do. So, especially in math, like what kind of research in math that you are asking your students? Okay, how to do all pace teaching in one online session, right? How to fit everything in, right? You have only a short limited of time, how to fit everything in. That's a challenge for a lot of teachers. Okay, so keep coming, right? If you haven't written your response, feel free to continue. But I think I'll move on. Okay, so but I'll be interesting to hear your thoughts. All right. So from what a lot of you have mentioned, you spend your time thinking about um, the lesson. Okay, how to. Okay, let me. Okay, so how to prepare your lesson, the methods that you're going to use. Okay, how to deliver it in a way that the students can understand, can enjoy, maybe, and also through some interactivity, games, and so on. Okay, so I think that's great. So a lot of you have thought about really what ways so that students can be engaged and really learn the materials. So one of the things that I want to focus on today in this session is this paradigm shift, a change from one way of thinking to another, especially in education. So a lot of you, I'm sure, have heard about the idea of active learning, right? About why it's important for students to be actively engaged. So the focus has shifted from the teacher as a center of the process to the students. So as this can be shown in this comic strip, so some of you might have seen it before, but in this situation, two boys are discussing, like the first boy say, oh, I taught Stripe, the dog, his dog, how to whistle. Okay, and then the friend says, well, I don't hear him whistling. And then he responded, I said, I taught him. I didn't say he learned it. Okay, so maybe this situation is true like 10, 20 years ago, where teachers would come in class, deliver the lesson, and then that's it. They're done. Okay, because the focus is, well, I come in, I deliver what I have to do. I have to, I just share what my lesson is, and then I'm done. But actually, we don't really know if the students are learning or not. And in a lot of cases, maybe only a few students are learning and a majority are lost. Um, so what is happening in education is now we are focusing more, we are shifting rather than on what the teacher does to what the students are doing. So in this quote by Madeline Hunter, she is a education specialist who deliver, if you Google her name, you will show about the Madeline Hunter lesson plan template about direct instruction. Yeah, her quote says that teaching is not just telling and learning is not having been told. Okay, so there's this huge shift, especially in the 21st century teaching, and a couple of things here, but I want to highlight on three aspects, which is moving from what is called a teacher focus to student focus. So rather than we are looking at what the teachers as the center in the lesson, or the teacher as a person that is in the spotlight, we are focusing on what the students are doing. And instead of focusing on the delivery, okay, the teacher as a delivery, as a source of all the knowledge, the teachers is more of a facilitator of learning. And finally, focus on, rather than focusing on the teaching, is focusing on the learning. So the point here is, when we are designing lessons, one of the biggest shift is, instead of thinking about what is being delivered, okay, we are asked to think about how the students are interacting with the materials. What should be the students be doing when they are engaging with this content? Okay, what are the things that they should be thinking about? What are the things that they should not be thinking about as well? Okay, so that to avoid any misconceptions, to avoid any ideas that they sometimes overgeneralize. So in that situation, so now, especially it becomes true now in this online learning situation, right? In class, well, we can still sort of, if we students are not paying attention, we can see them, and we can just like call on their names. But now in the online setting, we don't really know what's going on the other side, right? The students could be sleeping, could be eating, could be doing a lot of other things, right? And we have no control on that. So the best that we can do is we can design learning and design ways in which the students can interact with the materials that we share with them. Okay, and that will be the focus on what we will be doing today. So here are some of the OPM web resources. I'm just curious how many of you have access and use this. So if Jingse, you can share the poll. Do I need to stop sharing? Oh, okay, right away. Okay. So please click on the resources that you are familiar, right, that you have used in your teaching. So go ahead, you can start giving your vote. Okay, let's give another minute. Okay, so Jingse, can you see how many votes are in? Because I don't see anything.
Yes, the votes are still moving, so I'm just waiting a bit more.
All right, so you're in control.
Yep, I am. Okay, I'm going to end it right now. I'm going to share the results of the poll. Okay.
Okay, all
Can you
right.
see the results?
Yes. Ah, very interesting. So I think about half, right? Less than half have looked at the scheme of work. Okay. And then, yeah, so mostly the most I think is the learning activities. But I don't think that the participants are using like all of the resources, right? There's still a very quite low number. Okay, that's okay. So that's what we are here for today, right? Okay. So for the scheme of work, so I would really suggest that that you take a look at the scheme of work. Why? Because it gives you a big picture of what are the things that needs to be covered. And in this situation, this becomes more important because now you need to identify what are the important ideas and what needs to be covered within the time frame. Okay. So in a couple of days, the Ministry of Education will actually issue the sort of simplified version of the KADEs, the competencies. So that will be all levels from primary all the way to secondary high school. So normally you would have, let's say in the primary, you would have like 12, 13 days for a whole year. So they have really cut it down. So I was also involved in that, trying to identify which are the most essentials, because we understand that in this situation it's very challenging for teachers to try to cover everything. So, well, this might be a good news for us, right? So we are not compulsory in covering everything, but we are given the like a simplified version. So when that comes out, I think it will be great to go back to the scheme of work to identify what are the main points, the main ideas that needs to be covered, and you will want to spend more time on that and making sure that those are really really understood by the students. Okay. Another thing that you can use with the scheme of work is sometimes when we are teaching math at a certain grade level, we are only focused on that aspect, right? Let's say we're teaching seventh grade. Okay, so all I need to know as a teacher is seventh grade materials. I don't really need to know what's before and after. Well, that's actually not true, right? Because in math, everything is building on, right? Built on from previous understanding, and it keeps building on. So I think the scheme of work is a place for you to see the bigger picture of where the students come from, what are the materials that they have studied, and where they are going. So these are really something that you want to spend time looking at, identifying what are important ideas. We'll be looking at some of the PowerPoint presentations. So this is I think the best resources you have. You don't have to create your own PowerPoints, and some of the learning activities you can do, very interactive, and but it will be quite challenging to conduct it in an online setting. We'll look at how through the PowerPoints we can make it more engaging. Assessment, like I mentioned, the national exam model probably right now is not going to be very, doesn't really match with what's happening right now. But you still have the Cambridge style progression test papers so that you can give it to your students. All right, so I hope that you will have the opportunity to explore more. But I do want to focus for today on the PowerPoint presentation. So this is taken from the 7th grade. Okay, so the nice thing is it provides a nice concept map of what needs to be covered in terms of how the relationship between the concepts. So here we have the topic about sequences, functions, and graph, and those actually are very related topics. They are not just one topic standalone, but they are connected. Okay, and I'm sure that you all have done this or seen this, looking at patterns. Okay, you have the different kinds of patterns, how you can identify the patterns and extend the patterns. So these are all in the resources. Okay. All right, and so I'm not gonna go through this, but what I want to do, okay, so let's say after a students have completed a lesson on the sequences, okay, looking at the different patterns, numbers, let's say they have spent a couple of weeks on this. So now you want to get into the function, right? So normally in math, one way that a lot of teachers are doing is they would, the way that teachers teach is they share the information about the math and then give problems, practice problems, shows some examples, and then conduct practice problem. So I want to show you a different approach, a different way of having a math lesson. So this is something called a problem base, and I'm going to use also a jigsaw. So just a quick review for some of you who may not know jigsaw. Jigsaw is a cooperative learning strategy, right? And especially this is becoming more and more important in the context of online learning because students are so isolated. They're at home by themselves. So you want them to work together and collaborate because that's one of the 21st century skills that's very important nowadays. So in this cooperative learning, Jigsaw is one of the most famous version of cooperative learning. So what happened here is you would divide your class into groups, and each group consists of what you call the regular or home team. So let's say you would have a group of 4 students assigned. So that will be their home team. And then you would assign a topic for each of those students. So they become the expert, right? So, and then all the experts from all this each group will then meet to discuss the topic. And then once they mastered the content, they would then return to their home base and share what they have learned. So the other members in their team, they don't know the content that the expert has. So they have to listen and engage and make sure that they also got the ideas. So this is basically the jigsaw. Unfortunately, I wanted to do that today, but unfortunately because of the webinar rather than as a Zoom meeting, so we cannot create breakout rooms. So we're going to do a different version, which is that you, instead of going into groups, you'll be going through sort of like a gallery walk. So you will go into each of those topics. So here's what is going to happen in the next 30 minutes or so, right? So I'm going to launch here. So patterns are an important part of sense making for persons in a variety of occupations. So in this lesson, we will explore patterns that might be experienced by persons in 4 occupations. So in this model of teaching, you would start with a launch, with an idea. Here, I started with patterns and how it's related to some of the jobs where you actually try to make sense of patterns. So So there will be 4 different jobs or roles. So what is happening is each of you will pick one. Okay, so one of these 4. Uh, there's a link that will take you to a Google Doc where you cannot edit, but you can make comments. Okay, so the Google Doc has been set up so that you cannot make any changes on the document itself, but you can actually comments, right? So what I want you, each of you to do is pick one role. Okay, so make sure that not everyone pick the first one at the same time, right? So just randomly pick some. If you see already a lot of people there, maybe you want to find a different role. Okay, so the first one is the Pine Sports Complex manager, and then there is the Primo Pizzeria business owner, the marching band director, and the biologist. So what's going to happen is when you go to this page, there'll be the setup. There's some questions, some patterns that we will examine. Okay, and also you'll be asked to create graphs. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Desmos, but let me just show you quickly before you get into these rooms. So let me just, if you can go to desmos.com. Okay, so I think secondary students should really be engaged using technology. And I think one of the good technology that you can use is, is Desmos. Okay. So here's a Desmos, and then you can, well, I'm sure all of you know, you just type in an equation and it will show up. But in this context, we are not actually going to use the equation because what you have is you're going to have a table. Okay, what you have is going to be a table. So instead, what you need to do is click on the plus sign, and then you would go to table, and then you can actually type in the data set that shows up in the worksheet that you will look at. So let's say if I type in 0 and 1, you can see right away on the graph, it will show that point 0, 1. And then you can keep adding the information, and then you can start seeing the pattern. Okay. So let me just, hopefully this is enough for you to explore Desmos. So you're gonna look in the data points, the table, and then examine. You can give comments on the document, and then from there, later I will ask you then to move to a different role, and then you can see other people's comments, and also you can give feedback. So let me just once again share with you just to make sure that you have that information. I will type in, okay, here. All right, so those are the 4 roles. So feel free to choose one for now. Show you on the screen. So this is the biologist. So what's going to happen here? You have the role, and then there is the instruction. Even though it says complete the table of values, so you're not going to be able to do that. It's okay. So you can make a comment, right? So what do you think the values are? You can use Desmos to type in the data and see what happened. And then you have the marching band director, pizzeria business owner, and the Pine Sports. Okay, I see one person is already in at the Pine Sports Complex manager. Another person, okay, in the pizzeria. No one else in the marching band, so feel free to pick the marching band, the biologist. So spend about I think 10 minutes to look at data. What do you think the patterns are? Okay. So if you want to use the Desmos to type in the table of values to see how it looks, that would be great. And I'm sure also you can come up with a formula, right? If you already know the general formula for the situation, the algebraic form. So go ahead. You can type in your comments. Okay, so just click anywhere, and then you can, and then go set insert comment. Okay, so that will give you the capability to write what your thoughts are. Okay, we have 3 people already here in the pizzeria. I think more people like pizza. All right. Only one person likes the sports manager, and no one wants to be in the marching band. I don't know why. Sometimes it's associated with being a nerd, maybe, if you're in the marching band. And no one else in the biologist. Right. Okay, so let me see. Oh, okay, there is someone in the marching band. It's not showing up though. Interesting. Okay. Okay, so feel free to explore. So put yourself in the role of a student. Okay, so when you're working on this, looking at the questions, different patterns. And if you have any questions, you can either type in the chat box, or if you raise your hand, also you Jingse will allow you to talk and ask questions. Okay, I see in the pizzeria, people are already starting to type in their answers. Okay. Oh, you can actually type. Okay, interesting. Oh, I thought I set it up as comment, but apparently you can edit it. Okay, it's okay. Feel free to do that. Okay, so you can see collaboration is happening. People type in their responses to the table. Oh, even Jingse is participating as well. Okay, marching band director is quite lonely there. No one is in there, or it's not showing up. I don't know why. I think someone mentioned already in there. Biologist as well. What's happening? Oh, make sure when you click on the link, it will then you can open with Google Docs so that you can edit like or add your comments. Okay, so there's a question. Should we assume the values in the table exhibit linear relationship? Read the context. Okay, so I think the context should provide enough information what kind of relationship. Okay, so if you're done with one of the roles, then feel free to move to another one, especially the one that has already been filled by other participants, and see if you notice anything. Compare the ones that you have done with the other ones. So if it is a Zoom meeting, then what happened is I could break you into groups of four, and then each person then will take on one role. And actually, that's and then you can actually discuss. So individually, that you will work on one specific role, and then after you're done, then you would discuss in your breakout groups. Okay, but unfortunately, because right now the setting is webinar, I cannot do that. So this is the best that I can come up with the situation. Okay, so again, once you're done, feel free to move to a different one and try to compare if you notice anything similar or sort of the same between the different contexts. Okay. So there are 8 people here and then 4 biologists, 1 and 1. think there's still a lot of attendees are probably like to observe rather than working on the problem. It's okay. And again, if you want to use the Desmos, okay, so you can also type in the values. So for example, here in the, let me pick this one. You have 1, 1, 2, 3, 6. Okay. Okay, so that's an example of, I used the biologist, last one, the sea turtles. Okay, so yeah, so while people are still working on it, so again, once you're done, oh, I can see people are start correcting each other, or okay, that's good. Okay, right. Yeah. So because we don't have the breakout room, so we won't have the capability for discussion. But normally with your students, then you would ask them to, after each person in the group. So again, remember in the group, it consists of 4 students. So each student will take on one of these roles. So one person will be in charge of the Pine Sports Complex. The other one is the business pizzeria owner, marching band director, and the biologist. So after they have worked on those problems, okay, so now they get to share, right? They share each of their solutions, and the aha moment should be they would start to realize that, well, basically they are pretty much the same. So these are some of the questions that you can have them. So they take turns sharing with each other, with each members of the team what they have learned, and then they compare. They compare if they see any similarities in the patterns, in the tables, graphs, algebraic representations, and then they can classify. So one of the things that right after they, let's say the first or second person start to share, they started to notice, oh, they are the same, even though they're all different contexts. They are showing the same kind of patterns, right? And then they can see that the patterns are given. There is a linear patterns, right? Y equals to 2x, and then there is another linear pattern which is 2x plus 1. But what do they notice is it's different. One is an even um, function, right? An even, it's all even numbers. The other one is all odd numbers. So you can have a rich discussion around these ideas based on the patterns. Now, here is they have not been taught about functions before. Okay, so here's something that is different. So for you, you already know about functions, but for students, this is given before actually they learn about function, so that they get to experience with the context given. They start to notice what's the pattern. Okay, even they don't know the words yet, like linear function, quarter, it's okay, but at least they can start seeing all those tables of values, and what happened when they plot it on the graph. If they can come up with algebraic representation. That's great. So that's before this, they have already learned about patterns, right? About generalizing pattern. So they can sort of come up with the algebra form, okay? But they haven't really get into the idea of functions. So from here, then you can lead them to the idea of functions. What is functions? The relationship between two quantities here. And here they can right away identify using their context. So in this way, you can see that the engagement is more on the students, what they are doing, rather than what the teacher is doing. So the students will be looking at the different patterns, they'll be sharing, they'll be discussing, and then they'll be generalizing, looking at each type of the classification. In this situation, we don't have the constant function, but that's another thing that they can start thinking of. Is there any real situation where it shows up in their lives, right? So these are, okay, so the similarities. So probably some of you already identified, right? Regardless of the context, there are 4 different contexts. You can see the equations were all this, 2x, 2x plus 1, and so on. And then regardless of the context, the tables and graphs were essentially the same. So that's conclusions that they would come up with when after discussing with their groups. And then you can get into the patterns. So what are the patterns that they notice, right? You can see the 2x represent even numbers, okay? And then in the graph, then they can sort of see, okay, the graph, it looks like a line going through the origin with slope of 2, even though they may or may not have learned about slope, it's okay, but they see direct variation. So as one increases, the other increases as well. And then you have y equals to 2x plus 1, which is odd numbers, starting at 3. And it's also a line. And then you can ask questions further. Okay, so how are the 2 lines different, the 2x and 2x plus 1? You can get into this whole discussion about you have 2 lines, but it's the plus 1. What does the plus 1 do? Okay, so again, these are all conversations, discussions before they actually learn about functions in a formal way, before they actually learn about linear function, okay, before they learn about quadratic function. But because of the context, you provide them with the context where they can try to make sense of the pattern. So after this, then you can start introducing to them the idea of what function is. Okay, so this is where you get into using the resources that's available, right? A function machine is a type of flow chart. There's an input and output. So again, tying back to the context in the pizza or in the marching band, what's the input, what's the output? And then they can sort of see, well, the input is a number and enters the function. So that makes a lot more sense rather than if you start right off showing them this slide with the students. So what I want my point is in this presentation is the teaching materials are available. Those are we have a very wealthy resources, but those are not going to teach your students. You need to set up in a way, think of a way in which what are the students going to be doing when they are interacting with these materials, okay? So, and I think in math, a lot of times we provide information, we provide the sort of decontextualized form, a formal, logical, abstract version of math that a lot of times makes students challenging for them to understand because it lacks the context. So what happened in this session earlier as the activities I've shown you is we provide the context so that the students can make sense of the problem. And when they're trying to make sense of the problem, that they then get into the idea, the mathematical idea behind it. So using the 4 different contexts, which basically they are all talking about the same idea, okay? They're talking about all these different types of functions. So even before they get into the formal idea of what function is, they already can make sense of what it is. And then then you provide more on more so logical side and more formalized version of what function is. Yeah, so unfortunately we cannot, yeah, it would be great. This activity should be done where you have the opportunity to discuss in your group. Yeah, but hopefully next time when we are back to normal, we can meet in person. So you can be working on your group tables sharing. That would be a much better option. But again, you can still do this if you're using Google. So some of you, I think, you are using Google Classroom, right, for your teaching online. So what you can do is you can set up different rooms, Google Meet, and then assign each group with one Google Meet. It's more challenging compared to Zoom because Zoom you can basically just click and then it will create the breakout rooms. You can assign them into breakout rooms and then you can set the timer, okay, and people will come back to the main room. So if you have Zoom, that would be great. But an alternative is using the Google Meet. Then you will create, let's say you have a class of 24 students, so that it means that you can create 6 groups. That means that you will create 6 different Google Meet account, right? And then they will go to, so each group will go to that specific Google Meet to discuss. And you can jump in and jump out of those Google Meet. I've tried that. It's a little bit more challenging because you need to make sure you turn off the other one, because otherwise there'll be 2 Google Meet going on. That's not, it's going to be challenging for you to try to listen to the students. So you need to quit that one, go into another one, or better if you have 2 computers, that also work. But probably not a lot of us have 2 computers. Okay. So this is an idea where you can still conduct collaborative or cooperative learning using a problem-based approach. So instead of teaching your students the content, you provide them with the context, with the problem, and as they engage with the materials, they then make sense of the idea. In our case today, they start to make sense of what functions are, okay, the different types of functions. So right away, rather than waiting for, let's say, after year 9, okay, right away when they're in year 7, they already are exposed to the different types of functions, even though they are not formally introduced all those different types of functions. Okay, so I hope that this gives you an idea of how to teach math in a different way, in a different approach. Teaching math doesn't mean that every time you have to teach them first what the content is, okay, and then assign them problem. You can actually turn that around. You can start with the problem, okay, especially contextualized problem where students can make sense of the idea, and then get into the formal math behind it. So I hope that this gives you a sense of what's going on, okay? So you can also create the same kind of idea using other topics in math as well. Okay, so let's say after this, you're teaching about linear function, right? So find different situations where in the context, they will look at different types of linear functions, right? Where the slope is positive, where the slope is negative, okay? Where the y-intercept can be different. Some starts from 0, others starts with different values. So providing that context, then you can bring them to see the more formal idea of mathematics after they are already exposed with the context. So I think that's all I have today. If you have any questions, any comments, anything that you would like to ask about how to teach in this way, so feel free to.
So
Okay.
Dr. Dicky, you have 2 questions.
Yes.
One is, could you give example of fun teaching by online?
Yeah.
I think online fun teaching for math.
Yeah.
So that's one. Would you want to address that first?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So depending what you mean by fun, yeah, fun teaching. So fun teaching could be something that the students enjoy, or it could be in the form of a game. So one thing that I find students really enjoy is if you use Kahoot style. So with the primary, I use Kahoot. So I would create problems, questions around the math ideas, and then because Kahoot is very competitive, right? You want to win, you want to make sure your name is on the top. So that's one way where you make it in a more competitive, game-like situation where students have to answer correctly to win. So that's one way. Another kind of fun is, well, students sometimes find fun when it's something more like relevant in their lives. So, for example, in secondary, let's say you can give them like a project to find out, okay, so let's say you are going to, your parent is going to buy you a new phone, right? So they have to then, so someone mentioned about research, then they have to research what is the best plan for them. So now there are a lot of different phone plan, right? There's a prepaid one, there's a one that's you have to pay monthly fee and so on. So you can assign them a project where they have to make a case. What is the best plan they have to buy? Okay, which is best for their situation. So it really depends on how much usage they have. So for some students, it might be fun in that way. So the problem is not everyone considered it the same, right? Some students may think that the game is very childlike. Okay, they don't feel like it's fun anymore because especially if you're teaching like middle school, 7, 8, 9, that's where it's a little bit weird age group, right? Because they find it's kind of different fun that they enjoy rather than compared to younger kids. They like the game and so on. So that's something that what you want to try to think of instead of fun is try to find something that they feel relevant. They feel that it's very close to their lives. Okay, it's something that they see the meaning of it. So one thing, maybe in this situation, they can start looking at the COVID data. So I think one of the teachers in the school asked the students to keep track of the number of new cases every day. Okay, and then they create tables, they create graphs. Okay, they analyze the graph. Okay, so what does it mean? So the question could be, okay, can you make a sort of rough prediction when it will peak and when we will have it will back to normal? Again, it's working with data, with model. So even like a 7, 8 grader, I think that was given to like a 9th grade students project. So find something that's relevant that they're experiencing nowadays. So for example, another idea could be, so they are using quotas, right, at home. So let's say you can ask them to, okay, calculate how much do you need to spend for school for a month. That could be a project that they find really meaningful, right? Because that's something that they experience, something that they can show. Okay, oh, I spend this much money. Wow, it's quite expensive actually, if they think about it, right? So that can be something that, although it might backfire, they will. Some parents will be asking for deduction from the school like school fee. So that could be another challenge. But the thing is, especially with secondary students, I think it becomes uh, exciting if it is relevant to their lives and they see that there is a connection to their own lives. What they are learning is something that's connected, okay, and then they can make use of that. So I think that is something that we are shooting for, right? Because when you're trying to find these games, okay, so Kahoot is exciting for the first time. So I've used with students, with teachers. They find it exciting the first time, but after like a couple of like 10 times, 20 times, oh, okay, it's not no longer exciting anymore. You have to find another one. So it's kind of challenging that way. So you want them to feel the excitement in learning is seeing that math is used in their daily life is helpful for them. Okay. All right. So the other question here is, how to teach students with learning difficulties. Okay, that seems like to be a very simple question, but it's not very simple to answer. So it really depends on what kind of learning difficulties, right? Because you cannot just say, okay, there's one type. There's actually a lot. So let's say even when we say autism has a very wide spectrum. So you cannot treat every child the same. So the first thing I would suggest is you want to find out more what kind of learning difficulties. So there are severe learning difficulties. There is also something that is mild. Okay, ADHD. All right. So ADHD means that the students cannot stay focused for long, and it needs to move around, right? So a lot of times for this kind of students and a project based something they actively do, okay, can be beneficial for them. So instead of giving them like a whole worksheet of 100 problems, you can break it down into pieces. And then instead of just writing, sometimes you can ask the students to record. For example, we're talking about the online, right? So they can record themselves explaining using a video and then submit it that as a way. So for the students, it's more active. So they have to speak, they have to record, they have to explain it rather than just doing one type. So you can vary uh, the kind of output that they shows you rather than it has to be in terms of writing. It could be in other forms. So for ADHD, you try to provide activities that where they are more engaged actively rather than it's going to be challenging for them to just sit down and listen for like 30 minutes. But the nice thing is actually for now they can if they're doing it like at home. So let's say instead of lecturing live, you can record your lecture, and then the students can actually pause at certain places, and then they can move around and then come back to it. So actually, in the home setting for ADHD student, I think they should be doing quite well because especially if they can stop the video and then they can move around first and then come back to it. Okay. Okay. But for yeah, I agree. So that's why I'm not asking you to make game for every meeting because it's very challenging. Okay. So what you want to do, as I said earlier, you want to find uh, meaningful activities, right? Something that's relevant. So let me give you an example. In the project that the Ministry of Education are working on is we want to focus on numeracy in the primary grades, literacy and numeracy. So in the modules developed, it's more catered to activities where the students are actively engaged while they are learning the math. So for example, instead of learning about measurement using like the normal from the book, they are actually measuring things. Okay, so those kind of activities where they actually get to be hands-on, or it's something that's relevant to them, that makes it better for them. Okay, so I'm not suggesting making game every meeting. Okay, it's almost impossible, and also after a while, the students also get bored because of the games.
Dr. Dicky, you have another question on the Q&A
Oh,
box.
okay.
Yeah, it says, can you suggest mathematical equation editor that students and teachers can use? It was a struggle for teachers and students to write down equations in Google Forms, Kahoot, quizzes, etc.
Yes, yes. Um, OneNote actually has a very good. If you're, you know what OneNote from Microsoft, right? OneNote. OneNote is actually you can actually write normal writing, and then it will convert your writing into um, the equation. Okay. And then even with OneNote, the nice thing is when you type in the equation or write the equation, it will then solve it for you. Yeah, but you don't want that for your students, right? Yeah, but try to explore OneNote. Let me see if I can find the link. Okay, so here's a video. Okay, let me share. Okay, I have to. So there's a built-in calculator in OneNote. Let me just share.
Many OneNote users are not aware that you can do mathematics right on any OneNote page. You just have to type in your equation, followed by an equal sign, and hit space. Boom.
And it actually has the capability of.
Then you can.
So for example, here.
Transform any handwriting.
For high school, let's say you want to just. You have a pad or XP pen, you can write it down, and then it will convert it right into the text form of the equation form. Oh. Yeah, so here is an example.
Really pretty powerful.
You actually write down the equation. Let's say this is an equation, right? Half plus 2/3 and so on. And actually the OneNote will actually compute it, right? Solve the equation for you. Yeah, nowadays technology is just amazing. So that could be an option if you can explore OneNote in your teaching. So you can, if you have a XP pen or something to write down, or if you have a tablet, okay, or an iPad, then you can use your screen to write the math equation, and then it will actually convert it on OneNote for you. Okay, students oftentimes use traditional laptops, so it is not possible for them to write well. Yeah, so that's unfortunate. Yeah, so the best you could do in situation where students have limited resources is they can still write on papers, and then they can screen shoot it, or they can take a video of that. So I think that's the best, because for math teachers, not only we want to see the result, right? We want to look at the process. So the best alternative right now, when they don't have any other technology, is just shoot a screenshot or take a video on the students working on the problems.
Hello. So Dr. Dicky, we have another question. Seems to have frozen. I'm not sure whether you are still hearing me, but Dr. Dicky seems to have frozen. What I'll do is Hi, okay. So before we end the session, can I just see whether if you're still hearing me by typing yes on the chat section? I think we lost Dr. Dicky for a while. So if you can hear me, can you just put a yes? Okay, very good. Thank you. So what I'll do is I'll just end today's session. But before that, I think some of you would have asked some of the resources that Dr. Dicky shared. Where are they? So I'll just do a very quick screen sharing. So these are actually some resources that are available online. So if you have a copy of our teacher's book, so at the back of teacher's book, you will be able to find this URL. So go to this URL, create an ID. So in this case, I have created my ID. So what you're seeing is when you create an ID and you ask for resources, So you will be able to see all the resources that we are providing for grade 7, grade 8, grade 9 for math, science, and for math and science. So I'm showing you an example of what we have right now. So this is the Amazing Maths grade 7. So these are all the resources available. So some of the resources that Dr. Dicky has shown actually comes from here. So what you have is you have a scheme of work. You also have the RPP. Over the chat, I think some of you have asked for RPP as well. So there are some presentation slides that you can actually use during your classroom teaching, and you are able to show these slides to your students. There are also additional activities that you can use and you can forward them to the students. So I will just pick up one example. Okay, so this is an example of a scheme of work here. So I'm going to download a copy so you will be able to see how it works. All right. So you are able to download all these resources. Okay. So I will have to share this. Okay. So there are two versions to the document. If you realize there were two, I picked out the PDF. So there is also a Word document whereby you can actually edit and put in your remarks here as well. So these are examples of scheme of work that you are able to just quickly download and edit it from here. So bear in mind, there were two versions. I have downloaded PDF, but there is also a Word document which you can download. Yeah. So going back to the resource file, so we are here. So there are also all these which feel free to explore. So I believe some of you mentioned that you have used some of these resources. Those of you who have not, I encourage you to go log in and to try to get these resources. Okay, so before I end, I'll just share some of the things lined up. So I think Dr. Dicky will be back with us again.
Yes, I'm back. Sorry, I got kicked out.
So he'll be joining us again in our next session, which will take place on the 8th of August, Saturday. So we have had our first session last week actually for primary school teachers, and there was some feedback. So one of the feedback is whether if we could have it over the weekend on Saturday where more people can join. So we have heard you, we have taken the feedback, and the next session is specifically on online teaching strategies. It will be done together with Mariana Magdalena. So she is actually also a speaker who have been with us for a number of sessions, specializing in science. So what happened is both Dr. Dicky and Ms. Mariana will be covering some of the online teaching strategies. And thereafter, we will have a second version. A second version, he'll cover a lot more on assessment, online assessment as well. So do join us. You will receive an email tomorrow with the certificate. At the end of the email, you will also find a link to the registration for the subsequent meetings. So yes, some of you asked whether if, because what happened was we were trying out a few things. So we started off with webinar. So webinar, the feature is such that we can't see you. But we hear you again. So the next session, it is a meeting. It is a meeting whereby we will be able to see you, and as well as we mentioned, you will be able to see one another. And Dr. Dicky has also asked to have breakout sessions where it's going to be a lot more interactive than this. So yes, so we have heard you and we will take all these into consideration. So do join us for our next session. So Dr. Dicky, before we end, do you have anything else to add? I believe you were cut off. Did you have any more things to add before that?
Yes, I was just reading on one of the comments from I don't know, Mr. or Miss, I don't know, Reggie, Mr. maybe. Yeah, about performance tasks. So one of the things that when we think about what students can do, think about projects or assessment or performance tasks that students can do actually at home. So find the things that they are available around them, and then they can think like create some like project or performance assessment, performance task that they can do at home. So that's actually one of the projects that I'm working right now for the primary with the Minister of Education. So the students actually look for things, objects that's around them and use them as materials to learn math. Yeah. So yeah, so that's one of the challenges that I think teachers are trying to rack their brains around. Okay, how to engage your students at home. So I think that's also one important way we can think about.
Okay. Any other? I believe we've covered all questions for today.
So any other questions or? Yeah, so as Jingsen mentioned, in the next session with Bu Mariana, we'll be talking about more on the online strategies. Okay, we're going to be looking at some of the technologies that you can engage your students more. For example, like you want students to discuss, you want the students to really work on the project together. How do you do that? So we're going to be introducing some technology, some applications. Okay, so there's a question here about teaching geometry online. Geometry, then yeah, so I would recommend using GeoGebra. So that's another tools that is very dynamic, so students can create geometric objects and manipulate them. So it's free also. So if you haven't used it before, I recommend it. GeoGebra. That's the just type in Google and then you can download it for free. It doesn't have to be online. So there's a web version where you don't need to download, but you have to be connected, or you can just download it to your laptop and then work without the internet connection. So I think that's a very good way. It can also connect. So GeoGebra is geometry and algebra. So it also can create the algebraic functions of the geometry. So you get into analytical geometry also for that. So that's a very good tool to learn. And your students, I believe nowadays the students are much faster in learning all these tools than us. So it's going to take them a few click here and then they are already running with it. You're welcome.
Okay, so I guess that's about it for today, Dr. Dicky.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for joining us for this 1.5 hour session. We hope that you enjoyed the session. I am not a math person, but yet I enjoyed the session. Thank you. So we hope to see you again on the following session on online teaching strategies. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks all.